Chapter 2. Now that the girl had access to a window, the passage of time began to take on structure, meaning. Initially, she had kept track of the days, but gradually lost interest. Life wasn't so bad here. She had food, clean water, privacy. She'd never again take for granted things like shampoo, pillows, and carpet. The tension, the fear of being discovered dissipated with time. It began to seem that her life outside of Westmarch, even her life in the jail cell, had never existed. The present was reality, everything else was immaterial. She was safe, free from abuse or persecution, and her own master. Granted, she never left her room, or even threw wide the curtains, but she could decide when to eat, what to eat. Initially, food had nauseated her, but she had been unable to refrain from eating. Even as she made herself sick, she continued out of some primal instinct. As that passed, her furor to eat as much as she could as quickly as possible left. Ben's visits only came once or twice a week, but grew longer as time passed. The two young people could spend hours talking about everything and nothing all at once, and not recall what they had been talking about 15 minutes later. They grew increasingly comfortable in one another's presence, confiding everything from embarrassing habits to deepest fears. Ben began bringing Integrity books that he had procured from the common library, and they would discuss them as avidly as she had once discussed the latest movie. Integrity and Ben had so much in common. They liked the same things, understood what the other was trying to say. Though she had tried to restrain herself, Integrity couldn't help but crush on Ben. He was sweet, funny, not to mention cute. How could she not like him? Yet she feared she was setting herself up for disappointment. What could he possibly see in her? She was nothing but a liability. Sure, they had a lot in common, but so what? He could have as much in common with anyone. There were times when her throat would clench, when she caught him staring at her intently, but she forced herself to push past it and shrug it off. It all meant nothing. It would all lead to nothing. He was simply a nice guy who felt bad for her. End of story. But there were times that a small comment would send her heart racing, hope flaring through her veins against her will. At night she would lay awake, repeatedly telling herself he couldn't possibly have meant what she thought he had, that it had been an innocent, friendly remark, all while a smile slipped uncontrollably across her face. Anything he said, anything he did, every movement he made she was acutely aware of. His words were imprinted on her mind, his very inflection was memorized automatically. Yet she fought to keep control of her reeling head and searing emotions. Why set herself up for something she couldn't have? She was thinking along these same lines one morning when a sharp knock came at the door, followed by the sound of a key being slipped into the lock. She immediately jumped up, excitement written all over her face. "Get control of yourself," she chastised. Sitting hurriedly back down, she tried to look at the door with nothing more than passing interest. That expression was quickly replaced by one of shock and fear when the door was opened. Ben did not stand on the other side. Rather, a girl slightly older than herself stood there. Integrity panicked. What to do? There was nowhere to go, nowhere to hide. The girl had obviously seen her. "Oh, pardon me," the intruder said hastily, ducking back out of the room and closing the door gently before relocking it. Integrity sat, her breath spilling from her lungs where it had been trapped. She'd been discovered. Someone knew she was here. But why had the girl left so quickly? Had she gone to raise the alarm? But if she had, would she have asked Integrity's pardon? Possibly. Maybe it was all a decoy, a way to lure Integrity into a false sense of confidence. I have to get out of here. She hurried to the door, only to pause with her hand on the lock. What good would it do to go out in the hall? Not only would more people see her, but she'd get horribly lost. She hadn't forgotten what it had been like when Ben brought her here. The best she could hope for was to find an unlocked room and hide there, waiting for Glegnar to inevitably find her. No, that wasn't a solution. She moved to the window and moved the curtains out a fraction of an inch. Standing pressed against the wall, she peered cautiously outside. It was a clear, bright day, the sun lighting up nooks and crannies that could have provided temporary shelter. Moving the curtains slightly more, she moved to get a wider range of view. She sucked in her breath and moved back hastily. Someone was out there. To be exact, several someones were out there. Had they seen her in the window? Did they see the curtain move? What could she possibly do? Venture into the halls and most likely wind up lost, or jump out the window and be captured for sure? Neither option was appetizing. She could do far more harm than good by leaving the room. Perhaps if she waited long enough, the people outside would leave. Wait, they'd all been dressed in dark-colored coveralls and large hats. They were gardeners. They would be there all day. Indecision gripped her. If she left the room, she might chance upon a room with a window that faced a different side of the building. But even if she managed to get outside, then what? All she had seen out the window was dense forest. It could be only a few feet deep, or it could go on for miles. Was being lost in the woods with no food or water, surrounded by wild animals, really the wise thing to do? Especially when she didn't know for sure if the girl would report her? Of course she would be reported. People don't escape from jail and have everyone just forget about them magically. It was only a matter of time. This room wasn't safe any longer. She paced back and forth, sweat beading along her hairline. She had to get out, but she had to time it perfectly. If anyone saw her in the hallway, she was done for. She certainly couldn't go barreling out of the room right now. The blonde girl was probably still in the corridor or nearby. Integrity was restless, unable to be still for more than a few moments. Finally, she decided to gather a few cans of food to take with her. Who knew how long she'd be in her new room before she could move on elsewhere, or even if she'd find a new room. Better to be prepared than wanting. Besides, she had to keep herself busy as long as she possibly could so she wouldn't explode out of the door. She waited as long as she could bear, then walked to the door and pressed her ear to it, straining for any noise betraying the presence of the girl or anyone else. Hearing nothing, yet not satisfied, she lowered herself to the floor and peered under the door. The carpet and the door met so closely that she could see nothing. She wiped her sweating palms on her pants, then gripped the deadbolt. Tensing, fearing a telltale noise, she eased the lock open. Pausing, she heard no sound. With a deep breath, she gripped the door handle and slowly turned it until the catch released. This is it. She eased the door open slowly, peering anxiously into the hall. So far, so good. Pulling the door further inward, she eased her head around the frame and looked up and down the hallway. No sign of movement. Hoping her luck would hold, Integrity silently closed the door behind her, then, gripping her cans and can opener to her, turned right and set off quickly. Knowing speed was crucial as well as luck, she tried to move at a reasonable rate without going too quickly. At each junction she hesitated, listening for any sound before venturing forth. Glances over her shoulder were frequent, fear constant. All it took was one wrong turn, 1 second too fast or too slow for her to be discovered, yet getting as far away from her original room as possible was vital. How long could she possibly hold out? Peering around another corner, she jerked back and almost lost her balance. Just what she had feared. A man stood in the hallway to her left. Thankfully, his back had been turned when she had glanced around the corner, but he could just as easily turn and come back this way as continue on the way he had been going. Turning back, she began desperately but quietly trying door handles. The first she found unlocked opened into a long room filled with utilitarian bunk beds. Sensing that this room was well used, she moved along. The next door opened into the same room. The one after that was locked. Fearing every second that she would be discovered, Integrity eagerly accepted the next room that was unlocked and entered quickly, closing the door silently behind her and locking it. This room had a single bed, a wastebasket, and a small bureau. Everything was neat and clean but felt cold and bare. Every item in the room had a purpose and a place. It made Integrity feel faintly as though she had entered the military, but she figured that beggars can't be choosers and settled down on the bed to wait and plot her next move. She had a room with a lock and enough food to last a while if she paced herself, though how long she could stay here, she didn't know.
"Is there something I can help you with, miss?"
The blonde girl approached Integrity cautiously. Integrity, feeling increasingly trapped, sought any avenue of escape. Her frenzied thoughts blocked anything the woman said. It was irrelevant.
"Did you lose your way? I would be happy to assist you back to your quarters."
Integrity wanted to scream, but knew that would only add to her problems. This was the same girl that had found her before. How did she find her now, in this room? Had she been followed?
"If you'd just tell me what ails you, I'd do my best to right the situation."
Integrity glanced around desperately. Of course, she'd picked a room without a window. I'm a bona fide genius, I am. How can I get out of the door with her blocking my way?
"Please, sit down."
Before she knew what was happening, the woman had a hold on her arm and was guiding her toward the bed. Integrity tried to pull away, but the wisp of a woman was stronger than she appeared. Fearing a ruckus would only draw more attention to herself, Integrity warily sat on the bed. Perhaps if she bolted over the end of the bed, she'd make it to the door first. Sensing her thoughts, the woman shifted to block Integrity's view of the door.
"Now, won't you tell me what's wrong?"
Integrity stared mutely at her.
"My name is Gallia. I'm a supervisor here."
After Integrity remained silent, she pressed forward.
"I really do want to help you."
Integrity felt conflicted. The woman seemed sincere, but why would she want to help Integrity? On the other hand, if she were working for Glegnar, why string her along? After a moment, Integrity broached what she felt was a safe question. "What do you mean you're a supervisor?"
"I oversee the work of several undermaids at Westmarch. That is why I entered your quarters yesterday. I had not been informed that they were occupied."
Integrity looked about her restlessly.
"What can I do to help you, miss?"
Hoping she didn't look as scared as she felt, Integrity blurted out, "You cannot call Glegnar for starters." Gallia gave her a strange look.
"How do you know Glegnar?"
"What do you mean, how do I know Glegnar? I'm a slave. Slaves know Glegnar." Integrity felt antsy, eager to leave the room and the girl behind. Is there a chance she really doesn't mean me any harm?
"You're a slave? I thought you were a guest."
Gallia pursed her lips.
"This does present a problem. I presume Glegnar doesn't want you here."
Integrity shook her head.
"I can assure you I have no desire to turn you over to him. He's not precisely someone I'm anxious to please."
She frowned slightly.
"Where do you want me to take you? You can't stay here for long. He patrols these halls frequently. Do you want to go back to the room you were in?"
Integrity pulled on a piece of her hair nervously. "Can I trust you? Are you on the level?" Gallia gave a small smile.
"I'm a slave as well, albeit a slave of higher rank."
She shrugged her rank off as nothing of importance. Slaves help one another, not Glegnar. Integrity stood. When Gallia made no move to stop her but continued to look at her calmly, she felt reassured. "I don't know what to do." She began pacing the small confines of the room restlessly. "I don't know where I'm safe. I don't know where to go, what to do."
"Could you not return to your duties and act as though nothing has happened?"
"What duties? I don't have any duties." When Gallia said nothing, Integrity took a small breath and said, "I escaped from jail." Gallia's gaze dropped to the floor.
"Oh dear."
After a moment of thinking, she said,
"I suppose the only thing I can do is try to find a safe place for you for the time being. This hallway isn't the answer, I assure you. Did anyone else know you were in your room?"
Integrity bit her lip. Gallia said softly,
"If there's anyone who can help us, we could certainly use the help. His or her identity is safe with me."
"There is Ben. He would help."
"I'm afraid I don't know a Ben. Can you describe him for me?"
Gallia leaned forward slightly, focusing on Integrity. "He's maybe 1/2 foot taller than me, short blonde hair, nice smile." As Gallia racked her mind, Integrity struggled to come up with more information. "He's always dressed really nice." Gallia refocused on Integrity, her gaze having wandered during her ruminations.
"Does he wear different items or the same ensemble day to day?"
"Different clothes?" Integrity was puzzled to know where Gallia was going with this line of questioning. Of course he wore different clothes. Who wouldn't?
Ben, Ben.
Gallia repeated the name quietly under her breath, also rising from the bed. Suddenly her head snapped up.
Ben, son of Dagnus?
Integrity shrugged. I don't know who his father was. She was growing more and more confused by the moment.
It must be him.
Seeing the confusion written on Integrity's face, Gallia reached out and touched her gently on the arm, her fingers cold.
I'll find him, speak to him. You are sure he will help us?
Integrity nodded mutely, and Gallia turned to leave.
Please lock the door after me. I'll return as soon as I can.
Integrity turned the lock and checked to make sure it was secure after Gallia had left. She prayed silently, please let her help me. Please help me to have made the right decision. A faint sense of quiet settled deep inside of her, and she returned to pacing the room, ears tuned to any sound from the door.
What if she can't find Ben? She worried. What if he's mad at me? I've complicated everything. If I would have just stayed put and waited for him to come, Gallia wouldn't know anything about him.
When Ben arrived, Integrity felt herself relaxing instantly. Even if he was mad at her, he was here. That's all she needed. He strode quickly across the room, concern written plainly on his features. Are you okay? I'm so sorry this happened. He leaned forward and gave her a quick hug. She stiffened, trying to keep her elation to a minimum. He's just being polite. Get a grip, girl. I'm okay. I'm sorry I ran like that. It was stupid of me. Integrity could feel color prickling in her cheeks, both from shame and embarrassment at how warm she felt from their brief contact. No, Ben said, pulling her into another hug. What were you supposed to do? You had no idea Gallia was okay. Thoughts tumbled through Integrity's mind. Should I hug him back? Get your arms up at least. You don't want to look rude, do you? Just don't appear too overeager. Ben broke the hug but kept his hands on her shoulders. Integrity was finding it hard to breathe, tingles trickling down from where his hands rested. Everything's going to be fine. Don't worry, we can fix this. All we have to do is get you back where you were without anyone seeing you. Gallia spoke, and Integrity looked at her for the first time since she and Ben had entered the room.
The section you are in is empty at the moment. The only reason I found you is due to annual inspection. I was making sure the room was ready to receive visitors. No one will bother you there.
Feeling awkward, Integrity stepped back from Ben and smiled at Gallia. I'm sorry to cause you so much trouble.
Fret not, all will be well.
This is a good thing, Integrity. Now we have another person on our side, someone else to help us. Ben smiled, and Integrity's heart gave a small leap. Now, if I can't get to you, Gallia can check and make sure you have everything you need. We can trust her. Integrity gathered her few things together, Gallia giving her a strange look as she gathered the food cans, and the trio set off into the hallways once more. She didn't feel as on edge as she had the first time, knowing that either Ben or Gallia could distract someone if need be, while the other led her on to her destination, though she felt foolish for carrying several days' worth of food. They arrived at her original room, and Integrity felt a guilty pleasure when Gallia left quickly, but Ben remained behind. I feel so stupid. I shouldn't have panicked like that. Ben took a step closer, causing her temperature to rise. Get control. He's just a guy. You did exactly what you should have done. We didn't make any plans for something like this, but if we had, I would have told you to do exactly what you did. It shouldn't ever happen again. But if it does, get out of here. I'll find you. Unable to keep staring into his eyes, she dropped her gaze and walked over to the dresser to set down the cans of food. She took a breath and, without turning around, said, I really do appreciate everything you do for me. I don't know what I'd do without you. I'd still be stuck in the prison. His voice was quiet, but she had no problem understanding his words clearly. It's a pleasure. You're special to me. She froze. A moment passed in silence. His voice louder now, he stepped away from her and said, Don't worry. Gallia will keep everyone away from here that might come. You're safer here than ever before. Move. Don't just stand here. She turned and gave him a small smile. Good. I'm glad I didn't make things worse than they already are. I don't want to get you in trouble. He made a small gesture, signifying that it was of little consequence if he got into trouble, then turned to leave the room. At the door, he hesitated, then turned back. "Do you like movies?" "Yeah, sure." When he didn't say anything else, she asked, "Why?" He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "Oh, I just thought I could get you a TV and DVD player. I mean, if you wanted. You must get pretty bored in here all day." She wanted to be daring and ask if he'd watch them with her, but she chickened out. "That'd be great, thanks." He ducked his head slightly, and then he was gone, the door closing with a click behind him. When Gallia asked Integrity if she'd like some company, Integrity agreed readily. Not only was she bored out of her mind, but she had a lot of questions that needed answering. "Are you finding yourself able to adjust to our way of life?" Gallia asked, sinking graciously to sit on the floor. Integrity plopped down as well and said, "I guess I'm adjusting. Not to be rude, but why do you talk like that, all neat and proper?" Gallia gave a small shrug. "I suppose it's the way I was raised. My parents taught me that the way one speaks affects the way that person is viewed." Integrity had noticed that Gallia wore the same outfit, a simple gray skirt and white button-up shirt, as she had worn when they first met. "You've already been rude. Don't push it. You wear the same clothes more than once, don't you?" "I'm glad that you are adapting. I know it was a difficult change to make personally. Old habits are difficult to break." Integrity nodded. "I know what you mean. Sometimes I wake up and think I'm back home, that I'll get up and go to school. Once in a while some thought will pop into my head that I know I can't do, but was routine before I came to Westmarch, you know?" Gallia nodded. "I understand. I'm glad that you have Westmarch to help with the change. I was not so fortunate." She brushed her long blonde hair over her shoulder. "What do you mean?" Integrity was baffled. How could this horrible place help anything? "When I changed over, I was abandoned in a strange place. I understood little of what was happening. I was relieved when a group from Westmarch found me and brought me here." "You were glad to be a slave?" Integrity was growing more confused by the second. So much of what Gallia had just said was cryptic at best. "Odd, I realize, but true nevertheless. Here I am protected from those who would do me harm. In the majority, I have been treated well here." Integrity shook her head. "I don't get it. You've been treated good? Didn't you spend time in the jail?" Gallia shook her head. "No, I didn't. It is very rare here for anyone to be restrained. I know of very few instances where the prison has been used." "So why was I locked up? What made me different?" "That I do not know. You've asked a fair number of questions. May I ask a few of my own?" Gallia gave her a friendly smile, and Integrity found herself liking the girl more and more. Despite her flawless appearance and perfect posture, Integrity did not feel that Gallia was putting on airs in any way. It was just part of her. "That's fair. What do you want to know?" Gallia clasped her hands together in her lap. "I'm not quite sure how to say this." She paused, and Integrity gestured for her to go on. "How have you come to know Ben so well?" Integrity laughed. "I was trying to figure out what you could ask me that was so bad that you'd hesitate like that." Gallia's shoulders relaxed, and Integrity continued. "We met in the prison. He brought me food sometimes. Then he broke me out after Glegnor beat me up really bad. That's pretty much it." Gallia looked perplexed, but did not question Integrity further. "You are truly fortunate to have attracted the attention of one so, shall we say, attractive?" Integrity blushed. "I can't argue with you there. He is cute, but we're just friends. It's not like that." Gallia looked less than convinced. "Two people may not always feel the same about each other. If there is no interest on your side, that does not mean there is not one on his side." Embarrassed, trying to hide the pleased smile that sprang unbidden to her face, Integrity changed the subject. "How long have you been here?" When Gallia glanced at the door, Integrity clarified, "At Westmarch." Gallia thought for a moment before responding, "I haven't thought about that in a long time. I seem to have lost count at some point." "I guess?" Integrity prodded. "Hundreds of years," Gallia responded. When Integrity laughed, Gallia smiled politely. "As I said, my time here has not been unpleasant." Gesturing vaguely towards the window, she continued, "There's nothing for me out there. I have no desire to leave." Integrity felt something rebel inside her at Gallia's submissive attitude. She wanted to burst, convince Gallia that there was more to life than being a slave, but she was scared she'd offend the girl. She had so few friends here, so few people that could help her. There was no point in ruining a good thing. Besides, how did she know for sure that Gallia wouldn't rat her out if she knew Integrity wanted to escape? "It's certainly nicer living here than in the jail," Integrity said, skirting the subject. "I'll never take hot water for granted again." A somewhat awkward silence fell. As much as Integrity liked Gallia, she didn't know her well enough to trust her. There were many questions still left unanswered, but fear of offending each other hung in the air, and neither girl dared say anything but the most generic of comments. After a short time, Gallia politely excused herself and left. Integrity was sad to see her go, but thankful that she could relax her social graces for the time being. The conversation overall had been relaxed and pleasant, but thoughts began to slip into her mind. The only person she really trusted was Ben. He had risked everything to get her out of jail, and he continued to risk it all on a minute-by-minute basis. They had lucked out that Gallia had found Integrity and not someone who would have run immediately to Glegnar, but the kind of trust they shared couldn't be built overnight. Time alone would help Integrity trust Gallia more. Still, the constant fear of someone who could let something slip, accidentally or otherwise, placed yet another strain on Integrity. Life was a constant gamble here at Westmarch, no matter how much Gallia seemed to like it. Life at Westmarch continued at its never-ceasing pace. Those who called it home had learned long ago that there was little point in hurrying things along. It would all take care of itself in time. The ranks of maids underneath Gallia were falling into a quiet routine, unbroken by special events or important guests. Slaves and other lines of work continued with life day by day, each grateful to not have the job of another. All, that is, except for those few who were Jida's personal servants. Jida of the House of Downs was known far and wide for her beauty. From her high cheekbones to her effortless movements, the woman was as near perfection as many would ever come. Her only failing, the one thing that secured her place in reality, was her acidic personality. For countless years, Jida had received everything she wanted and discarded it with equal ease. Nothing was a challenge, nothing out of reach for her, and she knew it. She knew how to manipulate people into doing what she wanted, but when it came to slaves, she felt no need to hide her true nature. They would perform her tasks whether they liked it or not. The other servants of Westmarch knew all too well the plight each was in when under Jida's reign. She tended to grow weary of servants quickly, and they conveniently disappeared, never to be seen or heard from again. Rumors were many and varied, none pleasant, concerning their fate. Each time a slave in her service would disappear, all others would tense, knowing that one from their number would be chosen to replace the last. Very little in Westmarch was as dreaded as becoming one of Jida's own. One of the group, a man who looked to be in his late 20s, hurried up to Gallia in the hallway, hair in disarray. Struggling to catch his breath, he automatically smoothed his hair back into place and straightened up. "Lady Jida demands a new set of sheets, 1200 thread count in cream." Knowing that all of Jida's demands were to be fulfilled immediately for the welfare of all, Gallia gestured for the servant to follow her. When they reached the linen room, she showed him to the bed-sheets. "This section is all 1200 thread count or higher. Which color do you want?" The man paled noticeably, his face drawn. "There's more than one color. Which one is cream?" After a slight hesitation, Gallia pulled 2 flat sheets off of the shelf. "I would say one of these is the color Lady Jida is after." "But which?" Gallia could see sweat beading on his forehead. However, she could only shake her head in bewilderment. He swallowed. "I'll have to take both and let her choose. She'll—" His words trailed off, both knowing what lay in store for him on his return. Taking a complete set of each, taking care not to wrinkle them, he turned and hurried off down the hall, obviously holding himself to a walk. Gallia gave a small sigh. Others had been dismissed for far less. Gallia was never pleased to see Glegnar, nor was this an exception. She suspected that he had been drinking the night before. His bloodshot eyes seemed to have trouble focusing. The scent that drifted from him toward her caused her to take a small step backward, timing her move to when he would be unlikely to notice.
Gallia, you need to get over and clean the north hallway. Jida's in a state over the mirrors or something.
He rubbed a filthy hand roughly across his eyes, and Gallia inched backward once more. Striving to focus on her face once more, Glegnar continued,
You better do it. She don't want no underling.
The picture of a well-trained servant, Gallia gave a short curtsy, bowing her head, then turned and set off quietly toward the offending corridor. This was a fairly regular occurrence in Westmarch, and though cautious, Gallia was not overly concerned. Jida generally took her anger out on her personal servants, but it was of little import if she struck Gallia. Stopping off at a discreet supply closet, Gallia retrieved a small container of the necessary cleaners and continued her route, keeping her eyes focused meekly on the ground. The safest way to exist for a slave was to blend flawlessly into his or her surroundings, and Gallia had it down to an art. How else would she have become a supervisor? As Gallia entered the north walkway, she could hear the faint sounds of Jida's wrath. Her strident voice, the thuds of objects being hurled, doors slamming, it was all routine. Jida was the only regular tenant in the vicinity, most guests not wishing to hear her constant tantrums. Perhaps if I start directly across from her room it will ease her wrath. If she cannot find anything irritating, she'll have a hard time justifying herself. Gallia silently set cleansers on a nearby table and began washing the ornate mirror directly across from the closed door. The noise here was slightly louder, but the walls and doors of Westmarch were meant to provide privacy, and did a surprisingly good job despite their age. Gallia wiped the glass once more, making sure no errant streak remained, then proceeded to dust the deeply carved frame and adjacent sconces. She flinched involuntarily when something heavy struck the door behind her. Continuing her work, unhurried, she felt a brief wave of pity for whomever was receiving the brunt of the storm. Still, there was little she could do. It took a substantial amount of time to care for the north walkway. Gallia took the time to care for any small thing that may set Jida off once more. She was glad that Jida's personal servants had received a brief respite when the lady had stormed from her room, but she felt greater relief that Jida had not noticed her presence. Finishing her task, Gallia returned her load to the supply closet, then moved to check on those under her tutelage. Those under her were grateful for their undermaster, knowing Gallia was prone to pitch in readily wherever help was needed. No emergency seemed to flap her ever-present calm, no calamity distorted her aura. Gallia was valuable to all at Westmarch, whether they chose to recognize the fact or not. Yet Gallia herself had not the faintest inkling of her importance. She was a slave, nothing less or more, and would remain so for eternity.